Well, hello everyone, we're Group B, and today we're going to walk you through our Affirming Diversity project, which for us ended up being a book club. So this project asked for us to identify a couple of issues related to ELLs based on our practicum experiences and just what we notice whenever we go into a classroom. And for us, it was that there is a need for ELLs and native English speakers in mainstream classrooms to collaborate and socialize more. And also that sometimes teachers are not aware of the specific needs of their ELL students, or sometimes they're not even they fail to acknowledge that they have ELLs in the classroom. So they just like say they're shy, or like if they have a translator, they think like that their job is done. So we realized those are like the two main issues that stood up for us. So our driving question ended up being, how can we help ELLs and non-ELL students build a stronger relationship in the classroom while making sure that their academic and social emotional needs are still being addressed? So moving on to our product, like I mentioned before, it's going to be a diversity book club, within the classroom, in which ELLs and native English speakers that they do not usually interact with will get to share their thoughts upon a common reading. So for this presentation, Carly, Austin, and Aylin are going to walk us through their ideas for what their book club would look like in their classroom. But one thing we agreed on is that we want our book clubs to have two things in common, and that will be, number one, that the class will be divided into diverse groups, and that a selection of culturally responsive books would be part of the book club. So moving on to CRT principles, the way that our project relates to, back to CRT is that, number one, it goes back to learning within the context of culturally mediated instruction, and also reshaping the curriculum. And it also goes back to Nieto's articles whenever it talks about how students, whenever they go back into like mainstream classrooms, they're left there to either sink or swim. And of course, we want our students to be able to swim. And for us, a way to address that and make sure this happens will be through a book club. And it also goes back to the idea of constructive criticism and the importance it has in multicultural education. There are talks about how if students are to transcend their own cultural experiences in order to understand the differences of others, they need to go through a process of reflection and critique of their cultures and those of others. So this will be achieved through the discussion of a culturally aware book. So now I'm going to let Aylin talk about her book club project.
So I am an early childhood major, and I chose a book for first grade reading level. The book is titled My Two Blankets. It is a picture book that tells the story of a little girl who is trying to transition between her old and new world. Cartwheel, the main character, has immigrated to a new country, and her blanket is a metaphor for the culture she knows and feels safe in. So Cartwheel then creates a new blanket with the help of a friend, which expresses that she is becoming comfortable in her new culture. So the color is a big use in the story, as her culture is represented in red, and then transitions into blue, which is her new culture, which helps students see that transition. It is also in first person and uses descriptive metaphors to describe emotions. So for preparing students, before reading the book, I will read the blurb to students, and as a whole group discuss what it means. This will allow students to predict what they think the book is about. Then I will lead the conversation towards making personal connections to what it feels like when they experience new things. So the blurb I have quoted next to it, which is, this is a story about new ways of speaking, new ways of living, new ways of being. Next is the implementation. So during the reading, to explore students' prior knowledge and experiences, the reading will be in dialogic reading format. So open-ended questions following the acronyms of PEER, which stands for prompt, evaluate, expand, and repeat. And CROWD, which stands for completion, recall, open-ended, WH questions, and distancing. So the process of the book, after discussing and making predictions and actually reading the book, would be to assign the students into groups. For example, in a class of 10 students, the students will be divided into 2 groups. The purpose of the grouping is to not have all typical peers in one group and all atypical students in another, or to have all students from one ethnicity in one group. So what we want is for our students to share experiences and learn about each other. So during these small groups, students will individually fill out a worksheet with the prompts, I feel alone, scared when, and then blank. And when I saw someone who needed help, I blank. So these prompts will allow students to connect with the character and then share their answers in their small groups. So lastly, an additional activity with the book. So there are many activities that could be done with this book, such as creating a blanket that has a space for each student. So the blanket in the book was a quilt. It had several squares representing different aspects of Cartwheel's culture and memories. And on a big piece of paper, cut out like a blanket with squares drawn on, students can color a square representing themselves into the safe environment that is the class, which is being represented by the safety of the blanket.
So I decided to do The Hate You Give. I am an English major. So The Hate You Give kind of spoke out to me. This is a chapter book that highlights Star Carter as a 16-year-old who moves between two worlds, the poor neighborhood which she lives in and a fancy suburban prep school where she attends and has all of her friends. Star, who was a witness to a fatal shooting of her childhood best friend, Khalil, who was part of the poor neighborhood. Within the story, Star has to figure out how and why she can help her community without endangering her life. She has to go through different people to make her community work and different ethnicities. So preparing students. In order to prepare for this class, I will tell the students that this will be a tough reading or novel to read, and there will be some parts that could be tough to understand. After giving this quick description, I will help students to understand this novel by doing a gallery walk of different protests or riots that happen within the United States across multiple ethnic backgrounds. Another idea that I can implement would be to break down why riots start and how they can be stopped or better understood as a whole group discussion during class time. And for implementation, during the reading, I'll have different methods each week on how we will read. So one week we can read the book as a class during whole group. Another week will be an audio version from an online source such as YouTube, and finally, we'll be split up into groups of 4 and 5, depending on the class size, to either finish all the reading or just to go into that direction. After each reading, students will fill out a quick questionnaire that focuses on how they feel about the book, what they have done, what would they have done in certain situations, and how the riots, the trial, or their own peers would have treated them if this book was written in their own race. And additional activities. So in all honesty, there are extra activities that you can do within this book. One example I would like to implement is a spoken word poem. I found this activity pretty useful and pretty insightful whenever I tried implementing it. Within this activity, we would finish off the book and have each student give a 2-minute spoken word poem about how they feel in the book or what would happen if this happened in their own culture, race, / ethnicity, just depending on how they feel. Students would also present this information at the end and would have a group discussion on how protests can be dangerous, but also rewarding depending on how they use their own voice.
And now for social studies. The book I chose to use is a collection of primary documents, which was important to me as a social studies teacher. So it's called A Different Mirror of Young People, and it's a collection of letters, diaries, and poems based on the experiences of young to older migrant Americans. Specifically, I will be doing this instead of as a whole book activity. We're going to go chapter by chapter. So chapter 10 is based on Japanese immigrants wanting to escape high taxation and limited land. They came to Hawaii and the US mainland where they heard money grew on trees. They found hard work, exploitation, and prejudice on the Hawaiian plantations. They learned to unite with other immigrants to gain dignity. Life on the mainland was not much easier. They brought California farmland to life, but even in their second generation, they had to prove that they were worthy to be called American. So for preparing my students, I'm going to go chapter by chapter. And what I want to do is I want to prep them with vocabulary. I know that this vocabulary is a lot, which I think will level out the ELLs and the non-ELLs because everyone can learn from this. This isn't just new vocabulary needed for the ELLs. But we would start off because some of this is like, what is this word? What does it mean? Culturally, what does it mean? So that's how I will be preparing my students. For the implementation, based on each chapter of the book, we will have some chapters being read as whole group discussion and whole group read aloud. And then for others, we will have like groups implemented, like discussed before. For this chapter, I think it would be okay for our diverse groups to go ahead and read this together. After this particular reading, students will research and answer the following questions. What were living conditions like for workers on the Hawaiian plantations? This can be taken straight from their reading as a primary document. They can use that to answer this question. Find the Sacramento and Imperial Valleys on a map in California. In social studies, we really value geography and map reading. So finding this map on my slide will be important for them to click, okay, this is where in the world this took place. And then I will have them research what is the connotation of the word Oriental and why is the use of the word to describe people considered inappropriate? And this is my way of helping teach tolerance in our world. And maybe it'll help click to my students that using other words that aren't nice, that our students shouldn't be using those words. And then lastly, additional activities. I want my activities for this book to represent the culture that was being discussed. So students could write a haiku to summarize the chapter. And then this is how you would write a haiku over here. And this is what a traditional Japanese haiku would look like.
So as a conclusion, I'm just going to briefly go over the possible beneficiaries of this idea. And besides the ELL students, so number one would be native English speakers, because students will get to reflect on their own culture, like it goes back to Sonia Nieto's article, while trying to understand aspects of their classmates' cultures as well. And for teachers will become aware of the diversity that exists within their classrooms and will be able to expand their knowledge of ELL's needs in order to bring better outcomes. And lastly, our project idea would be like a pilot for what a book club would look like in a classroom. And if it receives like a positive outcome, then we expect like other teachers to then start implementing this. And hopefully by the end, it could be implemented at a school level. So those will be like the possible beneficiaries. So that was it from group B. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Here are our citations. Thank you.